I've called this perfect pitch, but I don't really think there is a perfect pitch. I just really like alliteration. And so that's the title. And we can talk about what makes a good pitch, what types of pitch you should make in different situations to different types of media. There's a big shifting media landscape, and I think it's really changed the way artists have to deal with writing about their own work, writing about other artists' work, and entering the critical dialogue in general. And I'm also aware that there's a lot of expertise in the room already, so I'd really like this to be also a dialogue and maybe even sharing some experiences that you've experienced in your endeavors to share your work and the work of others. And so, as you may know, my background is in publishing in we're like a niche magazine, we're national, and that presents its own challenges. But we publish a bi-monthly magazine. We publish 6 magazines a year. Yeah, bi-monthly. We're a bi-monthly magazine, and we also do a lot of publishing online now. And now is an interesting time for especially small magazines as they figure out how to navigate, are we still going to do a print format? Are we still going to have, how much of our material are we going to have online? How are we going to monetize our product? So all of these are things that you should maybe know as artists when you go to share your work with media. I also really want to kind of bring in some of what Wanda was talking about with her really great presentation, and she was, she presented with a lot of candor. It's really important for me and for artists to consider who is the voice that you want to tell your work to other people. As Wanda was talking about, artists are on the forefront of critical dialogue, and I think it's really important for artists to be heard and to, often your work is really political, and who's telling those stories makes a really big difference. So a lot of the things that publications and magazines and maybe a little bit less newspapers are thinking about now is not just who are we representing within our pages, but also who gets to tell those stories and how are they telling them. So today I just want to, did that work? I want to talk a little bit about what the benefits of pitching are for an artist or a writer. What are the benefits of getting involved in that critical dialogue instead of just making your work and hoping that people come to you? I want to talk about preparing to pitch. So what should a writer or an artist do in pitching to an editor? What kind of thing do you need to know going in before you reach out? And then I want to talk about approaching an editor. So how do you get your pitch noticed? I know that I get an inbox full of email every day, and it goes into different folders, and I look at it, when I have time, and I get through those emails. But timing is very important. How you approach the editor is very important in terms of getting your work noticed. And then a little bit about if you do get a yes on a pitch, what are some steps so that you can make sure that your work is being represented in ways that you're comfortable with, and different things like negotiating payments and all of that kind of stuff. Some of the slides you'll notice it later, it's been translated into a PDF from a PowerPoint, so some of the slides are a little wonky, but I'll just talk everybody through them. So why pitch? Here is another time, I'll go through the reasons I think it's great to pitch. I also kind of want to hear from the room because I may be missing things. So these are kind of the obvious things. Exposure of your name and work really helps. It can be used as a marketing tool. I hear a lot from artists that actually it's really strange, more on the commercial side of dance, who want visas working in the United States. And one of the things that you need to have is media coverage. And I have to tell them, we don't do promotional coverage, and we can't do those kinds of pieces. But I know there are magazines that do, so I give them those names. But there are all kinds of reasons that people want or need exposure. Also, engaging in a wider community. So Canada is really big, and if you're pitching to a national publication, you're going to be engaging, and your work's going to be seen by people that you may not normally be able to meet face-to-face. It can be, from my personal standpoint at a national publication, it can be really exciting to see like similar conversations arising simultaneously or at different times all across the country, and seeing, you know, those similar discourses happening, but those artists don't always get a chance to talk. So one of the things that I like to do is bring those artists together for a conversation. That kind of thing really excites me. On a more personal note, I think pitching your work can clarify your ideas as an artist or a writer. And yeah, it's just, I think for a lot of artists, they can be resistant to talking about their work or writing about their work. And it's different depending on what kind of aesthetic you're working with, I think. The issues are different in talking about work, but probably you will have to do it at some point. And I think it can be a useful tool to be able to, I don't want to say market yourself because that's very gross in some ways, but to have other people excited about your work. And then the benefits of being featured in print and online are you can get paid for work sometimes. So there's a financial benefit. It's also nice to have your work memorialized. So researchers can go back and look at, you know, what kind of work was being done 10 years ago in this area. And this is really important, especially for the performing arts, where there's sort of often less of an artifact of the art piece. And so one of the roles that I feel like our magazine fills this big hole in Canadian dance, that things just aren't getting documented in an accessible way. So I take that responsibility pretty seriously. And the final thing that I came up with is most editors really want to make new connections. We want to know what's going on. Even when we get overwhelmed by the amount of stuff going on, we still really want to know. And we're always looking for at least I am, I'm always looking for new artists to get excited about. It's so often that I think artists and writers can relate to this, but you spend a lot of time putting your work out there, and the feedback that you get is often really minimal. And so those kinds of exchanges are something that I get really excited about as a writer and an editor. So yeah, and they can lead to some really critical dialogue. So when you're preparing to pitch, so I talked to a couple, I share my office with a magazine called MusicWorks, and I was kind of picking, Jenny Punter is the editor there, and I was picking her brain, like, what are like the characteristics of the worst pitches that you get? And we both unanimously said, like, when people know nothing about the publication, it's very frustrating. And so I think the most important thing you can do, so step one, identify a publication. What type of publication do you want to contribute to, or what type of publication do you want to have your work featured in? And we'll talk a little bit later about the specifics of pitching to different types of periodicals or written publications. But yeah, finding that publication that is sort of like your desired way of being featured is sort of step one. Identifying what the tone of the writing is that they publish. So are they a daily newspaper that publishes sort of short news pieces that are, objective? Or do they do longer form journalism and interview artists directly? So there's all these things to consider. And what is their template? So where are they publishing? How often do they publish? Are they online only? Are they print and online? Do they publish every week? Those types of things. I'll tell you that the majority of artists that contact me tell me, I would really like you to review my show. And then I have numerous questions for them, because we, as a magazine, we do 3 reviews a month, because we have a pretty small budget and a pretty small staff, and that's from all over Canada. And a lot of times what people that approach me to do reviews actually want is a preview, because they want help selling tickets and getting the word out there about their show. And we publish reviews around 2 weeks after the reviewer sees the show, because we don't have the resources to turn around quick pieces of journalism and have them be accurate and thoughtful and thought-provoking. So our reviews are published online to make them come out faster, but they still take 2 weeks. So getting and knowing the intricacies of the publication will read it and look at what they do, because that will help you. It always helps an editor to know what as an artist, what do you want from us? Not just, I want a review, but do you want help getting the word out there about your show and all of those types of things? So number one pet peeve of editors is when people have no idea about the publication. And it's also a two-way relationship, right? And so we hope that if we do feature you in our magazine, that you'll maybe buy one, because we are both struggling arts organizations. And so having that dialogue start by getting to know each other, I think goes 2 ways. And I think a lot of artists more see arts organizations as what can you do for me, and a lot of arts organizations think of it as what can we do together to help you. So when you're approaching an editor, some of the do's and don'ts, these are very general, and the situation will differ depending on your publication, but some of the do's are send an email directly to the editor, figure out who's the current editor, do some research. I get a lot of emails about to the previous editor 2 editors ago, or just a general, hello. Try to find out who the editor is. This is kind of obvious common sense stuff. Craft an intriguing subject line for your email that's going to spark a little bit of attention so that I can see it in my inbox. Introduce yourself and your work instead of just sending a press release or a pitch. I want to know about you and why you're interested in writing for the magazine. If you have previous writing samples, send them. If you don't let that be an obstacle. A lot of publications are willing to work with young writers or young aspiring writers. It may just mean that we suggest a shorter piece at first. But so do send them if you have them, but if you don't hesitate. Do keep an up-to-date website that is relatively modern and easy to navigate with your work, and keep an updated CV on the website. This is not just for pitching, this is just in general, but I'm definitely going to look for somebody's website if they're an artist or a writer contacting me and I don't already know about them. If you don't hear back, it might be because the person you're pitching to is really busy, so send a follow-up email. Another one that isn't on here that I was thinking about during Wanda's talk was invite your editor for a studio visit, or meet in person, come down to their office, do some type of face-to-face exchange. I know that I wish that I had more opportunity to do things like this where I can actually meet artists face to face, and it's so rare that I am able to have this type of opportunity. It really makes a big difference to put a face to somebody's work and somebody's writing and somebody's name. Avoid being overly persistent. That's kind of what publicists do for artists. That's a publicist's job. And I know that not all artists have publicists, so do follow up, but don't send an email every day. We already talked about don't email an editor without knowledge of their publication first. I've been noticing, and I think this is sort of, might be precipitated by the slow migration to some publications going online, but a lot of the content in some magazines is now blurring the line between promotional and editorial content. And I think that this is a really useful thing for artists to know when approaching a publication, because you don't necessarily want your work represented by a publication that takes money for editorial material and blurs that line too much. It probably won't do justice to your work in a way that you want. That's just my opinion. I know that a lot in my field, a lot of more commercial dancers, it doesn't matter for them to have their work, to pay for their work to be in a publication. But it's obvious if you're familiar with a publication where those boundaries lie, I think. But just be careful about those kind of distinctions. And I've never done this, but I've heard stories from writers where some editors will still not take them up on writing an article, but have another writer write about the same topic. And that's not very ethical. But one of the ways that you can avoid this is try not to reveal every detail of your idea or your pitch. Give the editor enough to know about it, but don't give too much where it can be taken up by somebody else in the same way that you would want to write it. This is just kind of the evolution of like a vague to specific pitch. Most of what I get as an editor is, this is what I want you to do for me, and I need more information. So I need to also know this is what I can do for you, and I also need to know this is how it might work, this is how it might fit, and I also need to know why, if you're the writer, why you're the right person to tell the story, or why you're an artist that your work's important right now.